Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Carano. I am with RBP Chemical Technology, and I'm the chairperson of the TLP, the Thought Leadership Program from IPC. A little bit of background on the TLP. This is a newly created group. We put together some industry experts and thought leaders that what we want to do is provide our industry and our members some insight into things that are very critical to the growth and obviously the continued growth of our electronics industry and its importance in the world global economy. We have a number of great experts, one of them you're going to meet very shortly. But to achieve this goal, we are bringing on a wide variety of individuals with different amounts of different types of expertise, everything from environmental to workspace and workflow, manufacturing, factory of the future, environmental, and of course, innovation and technology. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Denny Fritz, who's a longtime industry expert with 40 plus years. He's spent time with on the supply side with McDermott, and he's also been a proponent of defense and innovation electronics, spending time with SAAC. And he's now an independent consultant to the printed circuit board and the electronics industry, again, with focus on defense. And we're going to hear a lot about that very shortly. Den is also a member of the Raymond E. Pritchard IPC Hall of Fame, and he's also an IPC fellow. He spent many years helping develop IPC standards that are very critical for our industry. So welcome, Denny. How are you today?
Fine, Mike. Thank you. It's good to see you here on this format. And thinking out loud, I would guess I've known you for 30 to 40 years and a lot of parallel paths through technology roadmaps and industry forums, and I'm happy to give you my opinions today. Thank you again.
Yeah, and we relish this because, like I said, I've watched your career and I've got to know you really for the last 15 years really well from various work on the IPC roadmaps and innovation. I know you're passionate about these things and about, workforce development, how important that is, for our industry going forward. So, what are the one of many things that interest you mostly that you feel passionate about for this industry of ours, particularly for electronics manufacturing?
I think your last word is my passion, manufacturing. I'd really like to emphasize that today on this thought leaders interview. Certainly, it's included printed circuit boards, but especially I'd like to emphasize electronic interconnections now. This is something that I've seen that needs to be manufactured, and it's to me a glaring gap in the United States supply chain that I'll get into today. Probably wearing two hats, one from the defense side and the other just from the general electronics economy in the United States. A couple of things, I mentioned technology roadmaps, but I've also tried to pay a lot of attention to the geography of where things are manufactured. So we can get further into that, Mike.
That's perfect. That's a great segue, Denny, into the passion of how our industry is set up, particularly in North America and with the critical aspect of our safety and security and defense and aerospace. You bring up a couple of good points. Since this is your passion and a great interest to you, thinking about this issue, what are the consequences if we don't tackle this particular problem, like you just mentioned?
Well, let me start off, Mike, by wearing my defense hat. And certainly I was not particularly involved with defense until 2006. Got drug in over issues of lead-free electronics. They're still principally on lead-containing solder, and I continue to work on those activities. But I think those are well established, and my thought leadership role is more on the interconnection. Defense would like to use all the available advanced technologies, artificial intelligence, 5G, virtual reality, all of those things. And those advanced semiconductors need the most advanced interconnection devices. And the US is particularly low in the manufacture of those. Invention, yes, that's easy. We can send the designs offshore and they get made principally in Asia, but there's a lack of that here. Offensively, I think that to have the best systems to defend our country and maintain peace, we need the most advanced electronics technology. I'm pushing IPC to speak for the entire interconnection industry and not just what historically has been the printed circuit industry. So that's a passion of mine, is to broaden the IPC message and plan where that message can be well received.
So that's basically like, you're taking the holistic approach to the entire supply chain. And I've heard, OEMs often refer to level 0, level 1, and level 2. Level 0 being the circuit board itself, and then level 1 being the components, the chips that go on that board, and then level 2 being the final part where that board, that assembly goes. So some look at it holistically, but what sounds like what you're saying is we're kind of missing that piece. And I mean, in your years, have you felt that we've, allowed ourselves to commoditize the printed circuit board instead of it being truly what it is, which is a complex enabling interconnect device that if without that, the chips have nowhere to go? And if it has been commoditized, it becomes obviously something is very difficult for even the best fabricators here to make, money to expand. Your thoughts on that?
Sure, Mike. I guess in backing up some thoughts, I've probably been exposed to what I call the whole enchilada approach. Around 2000 and for the 10 years following, I participated in an activity called JISSO, Jisso. I thought it was just a Japanese word that got translated lock, stock, and barrel, but it actually means more of what is the total view of electronics. And again, emphasizing what you said, from 0 as the IP that goes into making a chip. Just so we argued whether there were 2, 3, 4, or 5 levels, but that's not important. It's a matter of looking at the whole activity, manufacturing, who does it where, the standards, how do you handle the standards and pass these things off, and so forth. Commoditization, there is a fair amount of commoditization in some of these advanced substrates that have tremendous volume applications in cell phones and things like that. And certainly that occurs in Asia. Smaller volumes of these advanced substrates. I have some ideas I would like to promote, and I think I'll get back to those later in this interview.
Okay.
But again, they relate to manufacturing, how we do it, and how we judge success in the U.S.
Okay.
I'm certainly coming, Mike, at a USA view, but I think my view is common to Europe and possibly other areas in the world. And I think we all need to look at all of our own supply chain. So I hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah, it does, because it's a big picture. And, there is my personal, as being around you and also in this industry, the significant concern is, are we able to critically fabricate these connection devices to support even our medical side of the world, for life-saving, life support, and doing it reliably and, on time. And we see so much of that has been abdicated to Asia. It has to be a concern. And as we all remember, and you and I, there was 1,800 printed circuit board fabricators not too many years ago. It's down to maybe 190 to 200 actual manufacturing sites in North America, with several of those sites, 40 of those sites, controlled by 5 larger companies, as we know. And what's going to happen when a wafer level or a chip packaging company that comes on and says, hey, we need some substrates here. We need 50,000 a week, 100,000 a week. Well, that sounds great, but if we really are serious about, chips for America, there seems to me a disconnect here in the infrastructure and the technology to support chips for America.
I agree, Mike. There's no easy answer. I mean, we're all responding here in August of 2021 to what's going on in Washington, D.C., the effort to what I call throw money at the semiconductor problem. And certainly IPC is sorting that out, both at the governmental level and internally in some discussions as to where the printed circuit industry should go. Likewise, it's a long-term effort. I would like for this interconnection aspect to be emphasized. Personally, I don't think IPC is very strong with the people around the world that manufacture that. interconnections. I don't think there's any industry association, either SEMI or SIA or anybody that's entering that as a spokesperson. I would like to see IPC take a more active role, but to do that, IPC has got to establish some credibility in terms of member response, technical seminars, things like that. And that's a piece of this thought leadership program that I'm proposing. So there are some specific aspects of manufacture I guess I'll get to before the end of this, that a manufacturing philosophy I think that needs to occur in the US, but I'll leave that to maybe our last question.
Good. I think that's very critical, because I'm looking at where it was, when it was United States was number 1 and 2 with Japan not too many years ago. And now we're maybe 5th or 6th behind even Korea, Taiwan, even Thailand is probably, as in Korea, maybe a lot of that is being driven by Samsung, but it's a concern, because you and I know, and you lived in Indiana, you remember the OEMs that actually had the circuit board building capacity, right? When I started this industry, 60% of the boards were made by those OEMs. And then they decided, for whatever reason, to study the make or buy. And the decision was, well, we'll buy instead of, make the boards. We lost a lot of those good engineers, I think, and the R&D that was done to promote the growth of the interconnect. But when I go to Asia, I see R&D taking place with the fabricators there, the Chinese based, the Taiwanese based, and they've got PhDs working on, new things, and they interface with their OEMs. So I want your thoughts on that as well. Is it, what we've lost in terms of technique and know-how, seeing these engineers go to different companies that are not necessarily, building circuit boards, some of them not even in the supply chain. So you mentioned a couple of things about IPC and what they need to do. If I was to ask you, what would you ask if you were in front of Washington, D.C. right now, and you're in front of the people that control the money for funding, those senators and congressmen, you had that captive audience. What's the 1 or 2 things that you would tell them related to your passion here, that's very critical for them to understand?
I think I've emphasized enough this supply chain aspect and that need. How would we implement that? And a vision, I would say, Mike, of mine is a unified strategy coming out of Washington, D.C. for everything from chip concept through final assembly. I guess I'd call it an organized governmental GISO strategy.
Okay.
The piece that's missing is, what would we do about advanced interconnection and so forth? There's been an effort at the Washington, D.C. level to put in manufacturing institutes, and we have probably 15 of those now. I always get roughed up by the one that was not funded. Reliable electronics interconnection was brought up in 2015 and not funded. I wish we had that now. However, to me, manufacturing institutes are not the whole answer to this. They are pretty good, in my opinion, for discovery, but I think they suffer from the quote unquote valley of death problem, that once you discover it, you don't have a really good mechanism for putting this into volume production, and they don't go there. And I think we're badly missing that for some of this electronic interconnection. Mike, to me, the thing I want to emphasize to Washington, D.C. is that electronics are not manufactured by inspecting in quality at every single one of the, whatever you say, 70, 200, 500 steps of manufacture. You run a process that's under control, and when it's under control, you can drop advanced product in and get good yield of that, because you're running your advanced technology machines on lower level technology to keep your process under control. Now, the mechanism of doing that, I think, has to be discussed at the DC level. Would we pick and choose someone with a large contract to put in the most advanced technology and guarantee that there will be a market for that product? Perhaps that would be it. Can we have a consortium of some sort try to run this? But it would be a manufacturing oriented, not a discovery oriented process. I keep saying that we are very oriented toward hitting home runs in research here, but we're not very good at putting together base hits one after the other in manufacturing to get our manufacturing up to world-class status. So hope that helps answer your questions, Mike.
Well, it more than I was hoping for that. You've gave plenty of information here and your thoughts, because I've been traveling around and I see on the, well, maybe not this much this last year with COVID, but I see on the average 200 to 250 fabricators around the world on a yearly basis, maybe 80, 90 assemblies, companies, and a few other industries sprinkled in between. And your point about control, process control, equipment that is aging and not capable of doing, 2 mill lines in spaces. It's not the fact that the fabricator or the people are not able to do it. It's the equipment that's not up to snuff. You can't use a Chevette engine to pull a Mack truck. It's just not gonna work. You don't have the right tools. So is it because of lack of investment? Is it because of tax laws? And I hope that one of the thought leaders, including you and I and some of the others, can tackle the investments that are required by fabricators and assemblers to make the jump of the curve. And equipment, when you're not able to do the technology that you need to do to move up the curve and move up the profit lane, then it becomes a real scary situation. What are your thoughts on the supply base, though, from, let's say, equipment, and again, for our industry, the circuit board industry, equipment, chemistry, materials, and support? Do you feel that what's in North America now, even with the less than $3 billion printed wiring board, circuit board business, do you think that the structure is in place for these fabricators and assemblers to be able to access the expertise and the equipment efficiently and effectively that they need to compete?
I think there's real problems, Mike. I mean, if you throw out that the total value of U.S. printed circuit board production is on the order of 3 billion, maybe we could stretch it to 3.5 or 4 billion. You look at AT&S, who's my current poster child, they're putting $2 billion into an advanced interconnect facility going into Malaysia. I think they must have really good sales projections. They certainly are on top of the technology. If you want high volume interconnection production, you probably are looking at $1 billion. But other factors certainly are there, and I only brought up the marketing of it. The U.S. equipment market, to me, is very weak, and some of that is based on some of the internal work we did at the executive agent at Navy Crane. The U.S. is lacking certain pieces of equipment and fabrication that nobody makes here, in terms of imaging technology, test and inspection, processing. Certainly all of those are not generic US-based equipment manufacturers. In general, the feeling was that they are capable at friendly countries. Okay. Materials-wise, there's advanced materials that of in Asia for any layer micro via type constructions, whatever you want to call that, that have not historically been available based on either demand or shipping and some other factors, and those materials need to be either developed or licensed or something if we want a self-sufficient industry. There's a myriad of problems, but unless we sit down and get an organized solution to all of these, I don't see how we make big progress. If we keep hitting home runs, and it worries me that we've gone out and said that additive technology is the answer, and that's modern and that'll get us there. My analysis, Mike, is that that's not true. Semiconductor is a subtractive type business. I think that we need to emphasize better of our current processes with additive where we can, but we're looking to hit a home run and we need a lot of base hits. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to give you, I feel better now, Mike, for getting it off my chest.
Well, you've given a lot of food for thought, and I someone that's been in this industry for the 40 plus years like you and I have, we've seen this evolution, and we've seen enough going on, or I should say the abnegation of the technology to Asia. I mean, HDI was invented here, but yet the Japanese took it and run with it. They made miniaturization. You know, and I'll never forget having a discussion in 1992 with an individual that owned a North American printed circuit board fabrication. And if he told me if I hear you talk about HDI and micro vias again, I'm going to fire you. Well, you know, I don't work for you, but I guess, you know, he didn't want to hear it. He always thought it was about cell phones and toys, you know. So, you know, the flip phones, you know, it's just that kind of thinking. And no one could argue with his success in those days. He was doing really well, but that kind of mentality allowed us to lose a lot, I think. So yeah, you get in front of our government leaders, but you really got to employ IPC, like you said, to stretch themselves into the right circles to get this done. I know the Government Relations Committee of IPC and the team that is in Washington, D.C. is working hard to get some of these things done. But obviously, like you said, it's not quite getting the message completely tied in. And I can see, you know, Chips for America doesn't even mention printed circuit boards, right? That's you know, it's all fun and good, but if you build a chip making facility in Arizona, whatever the case may be, and $12 billion worth, where's the chips going to go? They got to get shipped back to Asia for assembly. And that's, you know, there's a lot of things missing here. There's the metrology, there's, you know, the instrumentation, there's the employees, you know, it is a concern, and workforce, you know, education is a concern going forward. What do you think IPC can do better from that standpoint? I mean, is it certifications? Is it standards, more training? How is it going to say we've got the people that they can go right now into a quote unquote chip making facility or a chip packaging facility and get the job done? Because I see the skill set obviously has not been developed in the sufficient numbers to support that.
I think one of the traps, Mike, is to say IPC will do what its members want. And certainly that has to be done. Okay. But to use that as the exclusive activity map for IPC, I think is a trap. I think IPC, and hopefully this thought leadership program and some of the other activities, will allow us at a high level to coordinate IPC activities.
Okay.
And I think that we need a vision of where IPC would like to be in government relations, in technology relations, et cetera, in 5 and probably 10 years, and use that extensively to plan our seminars, our standards, our education programs, et cetera, et cetera. I think IPC, maybe of all of those, education is doing the best. Certainly John Mitchell likes that. He emphasizes that. We've got good activities in those areas. Okay. In terms of standards, I see activity, but it's kind of bubble up activity and the squeaky wheel where medical or defense or somebody doesn't have a standard and it's coming there. In terms of supporting members that are suppliers or equipment manufacturers or whatever, I don't see that. I think we have to emphasize that again. Okay. I hope those views are shared by people that are listening to our interview, and maybe we can be a crystal point or a grain of sand in the oyster to get these things going.
Yeah, we got to be the lightning rod, and hopefully that's really what the TLP program was really formed for. So it'd be a lightning rod to look at, and you know, using these key leaders like yourself with the expertise that see, you know, where the gaps are, and there's significant gaps, whether it's a roadmap, whether it's a standard, whether it's workforce education, whether it's investment. So do you have any further thoughts? You mentioned you wanted to mention a few things here at the end. Would you like to comment or share any more information related to the industry and the path forward to make this thing as strong as it can be?
I want to pay tribute to IPC. IPC is the most open technology association, industry association that I deal with. It has the best representation, the equality between manufacturers, suppliers, end users, et cetera, of any industry association that I deal with. It has the potential, I think, to quickly address the problem, but I think it needs a plan at a relatively high level.
Okay.
I cannot say that I know everything. Some of this may be going on right now with groups that are being formed and active at either the DC level or the IPC headquarters level. And I hope to learn about those in the immediate future, but I see great opportunity if IPC seizes it to address these problems. So thank you.
Thank you, Denny. This has been very, very informative. So on behalf of Denny Fritz, this is Michael Carano with the IPC Thought Leadership Program.
Thank you, Mike.
Hey, thank you, Denny.